So achieving workforce diversity using AI technology is the topic of today's conversation, or this session's conversation. It's not the only thing we're talking about here at Ceipal Connect today, but as you know, it is one of our major themes, and it's such an important part of the landscape for the sector that we all know and love and work in. So wanted to start with sort of a baseline to say that recent research and ongoing research, we should say at this point, makes a really strong business case for putting diversity at the forefront, and making it a priority for your organization, no matter what end of the hiring spectrum you're on. I think it's key, because what we've seen is that there is a serious business advantage to companies who are willing to embrace diversity, and that diverse teams do outperform those teams that don't include diversity as one of their priorities. And so, Samir, I know 63% of leaders expect, as you can see, the contingent workforce, D&I, for the contingent workforce, D&I is going to become a higher priority because of social upheaval. Some of those we talked about in our last session. Can you tell us a little bit about how important that is for the contingent workforce, especially?
Yeah, it's important for both the full-time and contingent workforce. But for the full-time workforce, we have some measures like EEOC is the one, the government mandated a compliance report. We do it annually. But also there are, much more awareness of building and reporting the DEI metrics with the full-time workforce. But what we kind of do miss out is, it depends on the industry. There are from 20 to 40% of their workforce are diverse workforce, right? Some industry groups have much higher percentage than the other industry segments. But no matter what, 20 to 40% of the entire workforce is a contingent workforce is a big number to ignore, or at least not to count on it. So it is very important to know who are your contingent workforce, how diversified the workforce is, because part of the workforce, again, from 15 to 20% of the contingent workforce eventually became a full-time workforce. So if our contingent workforce is not enough diversified, you are not bringing any diversity to the workforce when you convert those into a full-time employee. So I think in the multiple levels. One is your today's contingent workforce becomes tomorrow's full-time workforce. If you're not diversified enough, then you're not going to build that momentum on building a diverse workforce. That's number one. Number two is the amount of money the corporations spends on the contingent workforce, anywhere from 20 to 1/3 of their spend on employees or on contingent workforce, and all that spend goes unaccountable if we don't measure the contingent, diversity in the contingent workforce. So it's very, very important.
And when you think about that, Samir, in the costs and the barriers to diversity within the workforce, it's striking that data would be a barrier, and today's the age of big data. So what are some of the barriers? And by the way, I should mention that this some of these stats that we're referring to are come from a partner organization, SIA, so you can check out that research directly as well.
Yeah, I know all the reports. The previous report was a McKinsey report, 2019, very famous. Everybody knows about it if you're into the DI space. And this is the SIA report. The number one thing is really, you collecting any information about the gender and ethnic background is really not optional, right? I mean, but the response rate for any such request of information is really a higher single digits, so less than 10%, right? Now we're saying one side, okay, we need to build a diverse workforce. We need to embrace diversity in the work, at all levels of the workforce. And the other side of, you cannot collect the information just because it's just too personal or too private. So how do we fit the gap? On one side, you can't collect the data, you can't do anything with it. It's just really, truly optional. On the other side, you're saying, we build a diverse workforce. So I think we firmly believe the technology would bridge the gap between, non-intrusive way, not able to, use the technology to to drive the aggregate level of data, the workforce insights, and then take an appropriate measures to build a diverse workforce based on those insights. Now, this whole process, there is no intrusive way to collect the data. There is no data privacy or compliance issues around. But we're all talking about an aggregate level. Okay, what's our let's say if you're a large manufacturing organization, we want to look into it. Okay, we have 1,000 or 2,000 engineers working across the globe. What percentage of our engineers are men versus women, right? What percentage of those engineers who are various ethnic groups? You may not have the data available. I'm talking about 2,000 is probably smaller, but global corporations have tens of thousands of employees. It's very hard to measure that. And on top of that, you have a contingent workforce, they're bringing the temp workforce, and eventually some percentage of them becomes a full-time workforce too. So it's more complicated than we ever thought. But I think technology really embraced to bridge those gaps and bring those insights without really, in a non-intrusive way.
And as you mentioned, Samir, it seems like a lot of organizations are focusing on supplier ownership instead of where the talent pool is and the source. And that's something that I think you've addressed and spoken about a lot. And this is something that Ceipal has been focusing on in terms of addressing it at the source, whether you're looking at your own organization, whether you're looking at your talent sources, or whether you just need to know more about the sector in general. What are some of the steps to success in terms of measuring those metrics?
Yeah, we've all thought about it. There's no silver bullet, right, to make something that, magically that something that we could be a most diverse workforce in next 6 months. That's not how it works, right? Because the workforce is the real people, then you have to have a specific plan. We're not able to change the entire organization in 2-3 years. It may take years, maybe, but you can look into what part of the organization is most weaker part in terms of the diversity goals, and then we pick those ones and start improving on it. And the steps to success is really measure, right? You need to know where you stand today. You need to know which part of the business that you want to improve your diverse workforce. And again, diversity comes after the skilled workforce comes into picture. Like, at the end of the day, you're hiring someone because of their skills, and then second, you're looking into I like my the candidates have skills that can do my job. But I also would like to see if I can bring more women workforce into the group. So it's really go hand in hand, the skilled workforce and the diverse workforce. So, for that, you need to have a sophisticated process to set up, right? Let's continue to measure your workforce diversity. And then make a very realistic plans, right? We talk about, if you go search in the Google, 2021 diversity, statement from any major corporation, you would, 2/3 of the companies today, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 of them, are actually reporting these diversity metrics on their website. So it's public data. So you pick any of those big ones, right? They have a very specific measure. Like they say, we want to improve our women workforce diversity program managers in our organization from 18% to 25%. How specific is that, really, right? And they talk about, we want to achieve this goal by 2025. Like, you have very time-bounded, specific segment of the business that you want to bring in. That's how you do it. You plan it, you measure today, and you plan it, and then you make a really concerted effort to bring those changes to the organization. So those are the 3 steps to be
right.
Really make a dent into the organization and bringing the real diverse workforce. Also, their qualified talent.
And, before we get too far into that, I want to tell people this is kind of the exciting part to me. This is where the rubber meets the road. When we talk about what to do about it, Ceipal has some technology that I think is really unique. And this is a sneak peek that those of you who were fortunate enough to choose this session, I think will enjoy and appreciate, because Samir's going to get into some of what Ceipal is doing to ensure that AI can put its customers at the forefront of this, whether you're working with large corporate entities, whether you're working with, MSPs, any part of the talent acquisition process. Staffing is included, but larger to smaller customers, I think, will be surprised by how easily it can be done and what can be done using this technology without stepping on any landmines. So it's just a little bit of an introduction to what Samir is about to tell you about, but I think it's important.
Yeah, thanks.
Samir, what do we do about it? You mentioned these 3 steps, of course, and it all starts with assessment. So we know that workforce diversity is important. Yeah, of course, we know it's a social good, and now we know the business case for it. But also it's important to your business, no matter what end of the hiring life cycle you're on. It seems to be important because it's important to your customers. Whether it's important to you or not almost doesn't matter. So the first thing to do, Samir, is assessment. And how do we do that?
Yeah, so the first 3-stage process, like first one is assessment. Like, I keep it very simple. Assessment is nothing but to measure where you stand in terms of your diversity of your workforce, right? So again, technology plays the role here. This is very non-intrusive. You're not going to ask anybody any information. So, but we built a technology algorithm that helps to, all we need is your first name and the last name, country code, or the location. So feeds the data into the algorithm that we built in the AI diversity algorithm. The way it does is basically, every name has name origins, and they have a specific locations in the countries. And, there's a lot of public data out there that exists over, a few centuries, and we curate all the data. We train the algorithms. Looks like, okay, if somebody has this name with this combination, is more likely is going to be the men versus women, and then we have specific ethnic groups. So it's a fascinating how it works. Like, for an example, I always say this to you, right? You buy a house, and that will be recorded public database somewhere in your county database. But after like 3 months, you search about your name, it comes up all the data automatically, search, like somebody can find your home address when you bought, what you bought, and all of that stuff. How is that? Because somewhere this data is stored in the public database, and then that's basically pulling that information. So likewise, there's a lot of information, history about the names of the first names and last names, their demographic and their origins of the names and stuff. We collect all the data, we pull that information, and give you, again, this is not a very certainty, but very probabilistic percentage, like what probability. So we're seeing the gender accuracy, almost it's 85 to 90% accuracy that the algorithm will predict men versus women. Again, I know we are other groups in it. So right now because the data is only available for men to women. I know we talk about LGBTQ, different categories. We don't have the data to do it, but at least we're covering most part of the data, men versus women. So that's the algorithm. So we continue to work on improving it. But right now, it gives you clear 90% certainty that we know who would be the men versus women from the workforce. And then ethnic side, we are tracking like 5 categories. White, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and Native American Pacific Islanders, right? So that data, again, how do we come to this? Based on the name, based on the public information out there, curated. We train these algorithms, and the algorithm is with almost 75 to 80% certainty. It tells who would be the person, belongs to what kind of ethnic background, right? So imagine, like, you just feed the data. I mean, if you go to our HR systems, you all have to do is pull your employee's first name, last name, and put there what country. If it's just one country, we know it's all from US or a specific, other countries. If you have a global corporation, just list the names of the countries belongs to each employee, and this feeds the data into the algorithm. Algorithm gives you, the gender probability of 90% close to, and ethnic probability of 75%. almost 80% certainty that what ethnic background comes into it, right? So let's take a look at how the reports looks like. So imagine this is how you're going to see it in the platform. Let's say if you have 2,000 employees and it feeds the data to the algorithm, it gives you a report just like this. It gives you, for an example, in this case, the sample we did. Oh, by the way, we trained the algorithm over 5 million data points. It's a large sample of data points that brings the more certainty and more accuracy of the measure. So let's say if you have a 2,000 employee organization, it gives you, hey, you know what, 72% male and 28% female employees in the organization. It gives you an ethnic percentage too, right? Like 11% African American, 14% Asian, 8% Hispanic, and 67% white, right? So let's say, okay, you know what, you have a specific goal, like we want to improve our ethnicity background from 67, now we have 67 white and rest, we have 33%, and it wants to, okay, I want at least to bring it to 40%, 7% improve on specific groups. Let's say, okay, I want to focus on Hispanic, Latino community, wants to bring more workforce from that. Then you know where he wants to do, what he wants to do, and how he wants to go after. Similarly, the diversity, you take another further drill down, 28% female, and how are they? The 28% female workforce are spread in various ethnic groups, and you can further divide into this. So again, like you have 21% African American who wants to bring more, higher percentage, or Hispanic, Latino wants to bring higher percentage. Now you have this baseline data at an aggregate level. We will not get you, the system will not give you individual level, but give you an aggregate level. So that's not really what you really want, because when you see these percentages, this clarity, then you could take a plan and what do I want? Where do I want to focus on? What ethnic groups I want to bring more parity to the organization? And that's the kind of things here. Okay, you know what? I want to bring our gender equity, which is start at 40% in next 2-3 years. Then you could bring more, female employee workforce into the organization. Then you could do a lot of other things. Then further drill down into this category, female diversity, number 3, and then you can really look into. So it's a powerful data without collecting the data from the employee base. And if you go to the next one too, yeah.
Yes. And I want to point out, I know certain slides may not be rendering properly because it's a Mac versus PC issue, I believe. But if anything's cut off, just let me know. Also, Samir, I wanted to point out that in addition to being able to, parse the data in such a way, I can't remember how many millions of data points that your algorithm is able to access to do that. But then in terms of your own internal data, you're also able to look at the inclusion aspects, like whether it's salary or what percentage of the female workforce versus the male workforces are leadership roles, and how much money they make within those roles, for example.
You want to go to the next slide? I think we have the data.
Okay.
Here, right? So for an example, right, and we look into the 26% female and 78%. I'm taking the previous example, right? Now we look into this, like, if you have the wage information of your employees, let's say, what do we collect, right? We just give us the employee first name, last name, and the wage. If we give that information, then we could get you this report, wage disparity by gender, right? In this case, aggregate female population of the workforce makes 49,500 versus the 58,200. This data gives you a lot of insights, right? Yes. So why this disparity? Why are female? Maybe because, not just several reasons, right? Maybe we have more women workforce at the associate level, but not at the executive or manager or director level. Maybe because of that, they're pulling down the average female workforce, the salaries of the female employee workforce, right? Or maybe there's just a real disparity, and then there's just female employees get paid lesser than male employees. So again, this data can give the corporations to look into, like, how do we fix it? What changes can be done? But unless you want to look into it, you gotta have a baseline. Same thing with disparity by ethnicity here, right? So
Yes.
like in this case, Hispanic is 28,000, have Asian 64, whites 68, and African American 35. And then why these two groups have a lower wages? Maybe because of disproportionately the higher population at the associate level, not at the manager, director, VP, or executive level. That's why bringing the whole average down to. So it gives you a lot of information. This can be applicable for anything, full-time, contingent workforce. It doesn't matter, right? You just have to feed the data. Same thing with the equity-wise, right? Like, we want to simplify this whole thing into 5 major groups, right? Associate, manager, director, vice president, and executive. Then you look into it, like what's the distribution looks like at a different role equity-wise, right? We see here the director, VP, and executive level, the participation of women into these managerial positions are lesser and lesser and lesser, right? And this is another thing, the data point that companies look into, like, how do we promote the more women workforce? How do we actually find more women workforce who fits into these managerial positions? So how do we bring this parity? Again, I all keep saying this, right? This is an aggregate data, right? Not on a specific individual data. It's an aggregate data, but it gives you a directional sense that where's the problem and how you tackle it, right? And then you really look into it, like, are we? Then you could actually can answer a lot of questions, right? Are we promoting women workforce equally, and are we hiring women workforce at higher positions? Are we paying our different things, not just the women, but also various ethnic background information too. So you could do a lot of things. We were only showing 10, but you can have 50 different positions. Like, you can measure that by reason. You can measure that by your plant, like manufacturing plant. You can measure that by the country, by division, by department. You can just a lot of things.
And I know I jumped the order a little bit, Samir, but I did want to mention that we're talking about supplier performance analysis. So you can look at this organizationally, or you can look at this in terms of, right, you can measure it right at the source of the talent, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back to the other slide, Scott, we talk about like a full-time workforce and contingent workforce, right? Here is a contingent workforce, right? And how do you look into how are you bringing your contingent workforce? We're just looking into one of the sources, suppliers, right? The large portion of your contingent workforce come from your staffing suppliers, right? Then look into it, because let's say if our contingent workforce contributes 20% of your total workforce, and 20% of that 20% becomes a full-time, that means unless you build a pretty equitable, diverse workforce through your supplier base, you are never able to meet these goals. So you probably want to measure your supplier workforce diversity. Then you look into these things, right? Gender diversity. How are your suppliers faring in terms of bringing the gender, like male versus female, contractors or contingent workforce. Similarly, at the various ethnic groups, you could literally measure who's the best performing suppliers, and these are your top 5 suppliers per se, and then your supplier 5 in the gender diversity by supplier number 5, is doing pretty good job of bringing very equitable, diverse gender workforce. And then if you look at the supplier 4, there's a lot of disparity. So it's a time to talk to the supplier. You know what? I appreciate you doing great and being a top 5 supplier for us. But can you guys also pay attention or focus on bringing more diverse candidates to our candidates, qualified candidates to us, and then focus on bringing this diverse. So really you are making the process work by really looking into identifying where the shortcomings, and then to making a very specific action. In this case, talking to the supplier and encouraging them to do better in bringing a more diverse workforce. Similarly, in ethnic diversity too, you can measure the ethnic diversity here. Again, supplier 5 is a pretty good distribution. But if you look at a supplier 4, I think we're looking into like in this case, Asian is 1% compared to other ethnic groups. So this is an opportunity to talk to supplier for can we look into bringing more Asian workforce, more African American workforce, right? And those kind of things, we'll have very meaningful conversations. And I think that's what it is. It's not just something that, okay, I put my data, run through a machine or some, algorithm that I'll have a data get fixed automatically. That's not how it works. This is something that it gives you a baseline measure where you stand and what sources are doing better, what sources are having gaps, and how you actually take specific measures to improve those things. So ultimately, your goal of the next 2 years to 5 years, you want to improve your diversity workforce, by like a specific division, specific plan, or specific, a country or region. You have a lot of baseline to make a very informed decisions about it. This is very powerful. It's a very important step. Without these other 2 steps are meaningless.
And it seems obviously like critical information for corporate organizations and MSPs and those perhaps on the procurement level. And then when we look at staffing organizations and staffing firms, I would think this is a significant competitive advantage to have awareness at the level of the talent source to be ahead of this trend that we expect to see in the coming days and weeks and months.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to move on, so that we can get to our Q&A as well. And again, I want to remind folks to drop any questions they have in our Q&A section on this session. But we wouldn't want to leave you without telling you what to do about it. So how do you even come up with a plan? How do we begin to do that, Samir?
So, as I mentioned, right, the step 1 is the most critical piece of the puzzle here, right? Without the step 1, there's no use of doing step 2 and step 3, the planning phase, right? Mm-hmm. So we have done the step 1. We identified, our baseline. Where do we stand in terms of our full-time workforce diversity and our contingent workforce diversity? Once you have those data points, then in the planning phase, really, you have this diversity assessment report, right? We've given, Ceipal has given you the report, right? Now, here is where you bring in your, corporate teams, right? Okay, what do we want to do with this? Now we know where we do well and where we want to make changes, and you actually make a very specific, measurable goals. Like if you look into any of the major corporations, like if you top 500 Fortune 500 corporations, 70% of them are actually reporting a diversity metrics on an annual basis, right? That number is continuing to go up. That number is continuing to go up into global corporations, Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000. I think there's a huge awareness of not just society good and being a good citizen and bringing everyone, but it's also real incentives for corporations to bring the diverse workforce, because diverse companies are more profitable, more innovative. Bring faster products to market and have an excellent higher service levels. So it's a very specific quantitative benefits of having a diverse workforce in their organization. So people, the corporations do realize, and then they want to really be part of that. So now you look into it, like if you take one of any of those out there, we have seen tons of those reports. We have seen some like specific reports like, we want to improve our women managers in our engineering division from 18% to 25% in next 3 years. That's a very specific measurement, right? Imagine if somebody wants to make that very one specific, which is really good, because if you have that specific goal, you have an opportunity to meet the goal. You can measure and then and see where you stand. Because that's the right thing to do, because you cannot say, I'm going to have my enterprise workforce from 20% female workforce to 30% female workforce, or I want to bring our current 15% African American workforce to 30% African American workforce. You cannot do. It's too broad if you do an organizational level. But why don't we just go by region, go by role, go by plant or division? I think those are much more measurable. We see more and more that's happening. In seeing those reports in from these corporations, right? So I have seen one of these reports from 18% to 25% women managers in next 3 years. How do they get to that without having a baseline measure? So that's why we're saying, once you have this baseline measure, then look into what's important for the corporation, and then you would set the goals, you identify the gaps, and then you create a planning document. That's a document that you would report annually. Here is where we stand. Here is who wants to do it, and that's the step 2.
So we've assessed. We know how good or how bad we are at DEI. We've put a plan together. What's next? How does it work? Putting it into action.
Yeah. So what we're saying is, when we have the plan, but how do you implement it, right? Mm-hmm. So we look into that the entire workforce coming into this organization, right? One is you have a full-time workforce, you have the contingent workforce, and then you're also continuously bringing the workforce from external sources. Right here is your internal talent sources are your employees, your contingent workforce, right? And then also your prospective candidates that you curated over time. But external talent sources are the sources that are coming from, your suppliers, your executive search firms, your freelancers, all kinds of talent that you're bringing into it. So it feeds the data into the AI diversity algorithm. So the algorithm basically enrich the data, right? Tells you tags them, digitally tags those data points, and then stores in the talent container, right? So what's happening is, let's say if we have very equitable workforce at an associate level, right? Then in the next higher up is the managerial positions, right? Now let's say you have 20% women managers, 80% male managers, right? And you want to improve the percentage by 15% in the next 3 years. So this data, this talent container, right? When you search for for qualified women candidates to become managers, right? One thing is you can look into this talent container, right? And this talent container, when you have a talent acquisition platform, it searches the candidates based on the skills. Number one, obviously, always remember skills comes first. Mm-hmm. And then second thing is, I want to pick most qualified women candidates for these positions. You can able to do that now because the data is enriched. It's digitally tagged. It knows, who are the most qualified women candidates for that. And then you can feed the data back into, give you those most qualified top 10 women managers who can fit the job. And then you pick and you continuously make a progress. Let's say if your talent container has this one you're talking about, 80% men, 20% women candidates, and if you search the talent container by your AI search engines and try to rank them, qualify and rank them, what are you going to see? It most probably you have a higher percentage of men comes up than the women candidates, right? But if you continuously monitor the talent container and bring the external sources, constantly feeds the data and keeps that database of candidates, internal and prospective candidates. So it's a more and more diversified this database. So when you search the database, then the more and more qualified candidates comes into picture. So I think this is a really cyclic process. That's why you see the cycle going back and forth. Yes. So over time, you really bring that the more diverse candidate pool that you built into the organization. Then when you actually start filling those roles, you will see more and more diverse teams that you're going to build over time. It's I just want to remind that this is not a silver bullet. This is not one thing that I can switch the on and off. I can bring this to no. This is you measure it constantly, you plan it on a regular basis, and then you constantly make a concerted effort to build a workforce. And it's a continuous process, right? You do it for over years, then you would really make a difference in bringing the diverse workforce.